Estamos con Sheldon Lee Glasgow, físico estadounidense, fue profesor del Departamento de Física de la Universidad de Harvard y también después de la Universidad de Boston, y Premio Nobel de Física en 1979. Gracias por estar con nosotros, doctor Glasgow. No puedo dejar de preguntarle cómo alguien que ha vivido acontecimientos históricos tan importantes en su infancia, como por ejemplo una Segunda Guerra Mundial, decide ser en aquel momento científico.
I first became interested in science through the science fiction, which I read when I was 12 or 13 years old, but also through the Second World War, because when the war was taking place, we had to learn how to identify different kinds of airplanes in case the Germans or the Japanese would bomb us. So we learned a lot about airplanes and how they work. And when I read, it was in March of 1944, when I was 12, that I read a science fiction story that imagined an atomic bomb. And this was in 1944, well before the atomic bomb became known. And it described the physics of the atomic bomb, uranium, and it talked about the different isotopes of uranium. And in fact, the story was investigated by the FBI, I later found out, because it had a lot of information which was well known but classified. So it was, anyway. So when the atomic bomb took place, I knew what it was, and I could explain it to my parents and my friends just what it was. But I was just a kid. I was 13 years old, and I was already committed to a career in science, and in particular to become a physicist.
Ha dicho en diversas ocasiones que un buen científico ha de ser también humanista. ¿Qué relación hay entre ambas disciplinas?
I can tell you many interesting things about how I met my wife and how things like that, but there is no humanistic aspect to the physics that I did. In general, scientists, not all scientists work on issues which are of immediate practical significance.
Yeah.
And surely the work I did had virtually nothing practical about it. So what we discovered for expanding humans' understanding of nature. I've always felt that being born in this mysterious earth, it is our duty to understand it as well as we can. And that was my primary motivation to do science. Not to make a startup, not to understand how to manipulate money, not to create a company of any kind, but simply to expand our understanding of nature. And I feel that I actually played a role in this story, and I'm very proud of that. Science is an extremely international endeavor. It always has been, going back to the 16th century, even beyond. Many of my very good friends throughout my life have come from different countries. And CERN, the laboratory where the Higgs boson was magnificently discovered in 2012, is a highly international organization in which 100 different nations contribute one way or another. So there is no other example of such a successful international endeavor.
En los últimos años se ha centrado mucho en luchar contra el cambio climático, en frenar el cambio climático. De hecho, ha dicho que ahora es lo más urgente que hay. ¿Tan crítica es la situación que vivimos?
Critical in a certain sense. Is it the most serious threat to us? Well, no, I think a nuclear war is a comparable danger, but that's another issue. Climate change nuclear war is like a heart attack. If it happens, you're dead. Climate change is more like senility. You gradually get weaker and weaker, and you lose your teeth, you lose your fingernails, you lose your sight, and then you die. So that's what's happening to the world. Is the world is getting sicker and sicker from carbon dioxide. We are actively poisoning the atmosphere. We are performing the most dangerous of all experiments. We're taking all of the carbon that's in the ground and putting it in the air.
Yeah.
And yes, that is going to have an effect on us. We're beginning to see a very small effect of climate warming. You haven't seen nothing yet. It's going to get very bad. And will anybody do anything to stop it? Well, we've had 30 years warning and have done nothing. So I'm not optimistic about climate change.
A pesar de la situación crítica que vivimos, hay mucha gente que da la espalda a la ciencia y niega esa situación crítica que supone el cambio climático.
I think that people are stupid. I think that the educational system is incompetent. I think that people do not learn that their lives are so contingent on science. They do not realize how much better life has become thanks to science. And I say, to hell with them. I have only contempt for my fellow people who are working to end the planet that I love.
En 1979 fue galardonado con el Premio Nobel de Física por su teoría de las 4 fuerzas fundamentales del universo. ¿Qué supuso ese descubrimiento para el mundo de la física y para el mundo de la ciencia en general?
I was very gratified for a number of things that I predicted in physics. I predicted the existence of the 4th quark. I named it the charmed quark. I predicted the existence of neutral currents, which were found in Switzerland in the 1970s. I'm very proud of my contributions to the emergence of the Standard Model. I think that I feel very fulfilled in my scientific work, and its importance, as I explained to you before, is simply to satisfy our sacred duty to understand the world as best we can.
¿Quién ha sido su mayor inspiración en el mundo de la ciencia?
Well, there were several of them. The most important was my thesis advisor, Julian Schwinger. And Julian, well, I didn't call him Julian when I was a graduate student, but I later would. He had many students at the same time, and there were 10 of us asking for thesis subjects at the same time. And I was the last on the list, and when he came to me, he had used up all of the normal problems, so he told me something rather crazy. He said to me that there are certain features of electricity and magnetism, electromagnetism, and the weak interactions, which were similar to one another. So could I create a unified theory of weak and electromagnetic interactions? which is what I would do, and but not then. I couldn't do that for my thesis, but I got my degree, and I went as a postdoctoral fellow to Copenhagen, to what has become known as the Niels Bohr Institute. In 1960, while in Copenhagen, I figured out let's say, the trick that allowed you to make the beginnings of an electroweak theory. And it was that paper that I wrote in 1960 when I was, I guess, 28 years old or so, that earned the Nobel Prize. Anyway, then after Copenhagen, I went to Caltech. I spent 2 years in Europe, some part of it in Geneva and part of it in Copenhagen. And afterward, while in Europe, I met Murray Gell-Mann, and he was the second most important person in my professional life. And he impressed me very much, and we wrote a very fine paper together. So I got a job at Stanford and taught for 1 year at Stanford. But while I was at Stanford, it was clear that I would never get tenure at Stanford because they never promoted people in those days, never.
Yeah.
So I quit, and I got a job at Berkeley, and I spent 3 very happy years there. And the third person who influenced me was a man named Luis Alvarez. He's very American despite his name. Luis Alvarez was an experimental physicist, and he had a large group of people working with him, and I became sort of the house theorist. I would just discuss things with them and try to understand what they had discovered. Okay. So I spent 3 years at Berkeley and often talking with Luis. And then I got an offer for a job at Harvard, so I went to Harvard in 1966. I got my thesis in 1958, so I had been floating around California and Europe for 8 years.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.